Back in the 80s, my Aunt Kay was in her early 20s. This was before she married my uncle, and when she would drive long distances back and forth between her parents and my uncles to visit. It was a bit of a transitional period for them. He had just graduated, and she hadn't moved out yet to be with him. It was a long drive, too, across several states, through the desert, which took her hours to do. And this desolate highway would have stretches of road that lasted hundreds of miles where you quite often wouldn't see another driver, let alone a gas station. So, Aunt Kay set out, and she began one of these journeys. A couple of hours into the drive, Aunt Kay noticed a dark vehicle slowly catching up to her. She barely noticed, though, as she continued to sing along to Les Mis until the vehicle got aggressively close. She turned off the music and looked into her rearview mirror, seeing the vehicle flash its brights and a hand pointing at her car and motioning to pull over. Alarmed, she quickly slowed down and began to look for a good place to pull off the road to see what was wrong with her car. The second that she began to pull off the road, though, she said that she felt and heard as clear as day, "Don't pull over." Then again, stronger, "Don't pull over." Call it God, or intuition, or just a gut feeling, whatever, but a jolt of adrenaline and fear shot through Aunt Kay's body as she hit the gas and peeled back out onto the highway. And heart pumping, Aunt Kay silently asked herself what the heck that was, as she saw the vehicle peel out behind her. The dark vehicle continued to closely follow, flashed their brights, and motioned her to pull over and stuff. And fear and confusion set in as Aunt Kay began to question what the heck was going on. Why was the driver motioning for her to pull over like this? Was there something wrong with her car? And what was that warning that she felt? It would have been a severe situation if her car broke down out there, that's for sure, especially before cell phones, but she chose to press on. Just as her resolve wavered, she started questioning if she truly did feel what she felt. And in fact, she even started slowing down when the dark vehicle picked up speed. It entered into the oncoming traffic lane, in fact, and came level to my aunt's car. The driver smiled, pointed, motioned, and mouthed the words, "Pull over," to my aunt. She said, though, that the second that she looked into this guy's eyes, she felt pure evil. She felt a horrible sick feeling in the pit of her stomach, and again heard the words in her head, "Don't pull over." She described him looking scary, greasy, and noticed that he was missing a couple of teeth in his smile that she'll never forget. That obviously sent chills through her, and this quickly dispelled any thoughts that she had of pulling over, and she put the pedal to the metal to try to lose him quickly. And he chased after her. She slowed down, he slowed down. She sped up, he sped up. It got to the point that he began to try and push her car off the road in the end. Aunt Kay was to the point of tears as this creep continued to terrorize her alone out in the middle of nowhere. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Aunt Kay sees a couple of semis off in the distance. She felt if only she could get close or even get in between these trucks, she would be safe, so she took off. He continued to flash his lights, honk his horn, and tried to hit her car until she got close enough to the trucks, and as she got in between them, she saw the dark vehicle slow way down and eventually disappear from view. She stayed with the trucks for a couple of hours until she felt safe enough to pull over at a gas station and just cry. Fast forward several years now, my aunt and uncle are married. He's working at a law firm as a high-profile criminal prosecutor in Las Vegas. She's now a full-time mum of several young children, and since I've known my aunt, she's been obsessed with true crime. Dateline, 2020, and Unsolved Mysteries were always playing in their house. But this day was different. She was folding laundry in the kitchen while listening to the TV in the other room. The interviewer was talking about a man who was being interviewed on death row. As she paired another match of socks, she heard the man describe one of his tactics for procuring victims. According to him, he would wait along the side of the highway. A car would go by with a family and he would wait. Another car with a male driver would go by and he would wait again, but every so often a car would go by with a pretty woman driving alone. So I would pull out behind them and follow him. I'd flash my brights, honk and motion for him to pull over. And Aunt Kay, upon hearing this, paralyzed, but continued to listen. When they would eventually pull over, I'd tell them to pop the hood and I'd be able to tell them what was wrong with their car. They would, and I would yank a couple of wires. When the car wouldn't start, I would tell them no problems. My buddy has a shop in the next town. I can give you a ride and he'll give you a fair deal. Upon hearing this, my aunt slowly moved into the living room. They would get in and then I would rape and kill them, bury them anywhere in the desert. When asked how many times he did this, he responded, "They'll never find all the bodies. I can't even count them." And how many got away? 2 or 3. My aunt stood there, alone, staring into the same toothless grin that she saw on that highway that day. And it was Henry Lee Lucas. This happened to one of my friends. He and 2 of his buddies decided to go camping one weekend in the Uinta Mountains, UT. They wanted to go out in the middle of nowhere to really get away from civilization and just chill and fish and stuff like that. All 3 of them are pretty outdoorsy and experienced with camping and backpacking, so this was really no big deal for them. They went up the trailhead, hiked about half a mile up the trail, and then they turned off and just hiked for about 4 miles away from their original position. They had little trail markers so they wouldn't get lost coming back. They find a spot and there's no sign of anyone around. The ground looks pretty much untouched by humans, and there was also a brook close by, so they decided that this was a good place to set up camp. All 3 of them had camping hammocks, so they set those up in the trees and then just kind of explored around for a bit before they decided to build a fire and eat and all that stuff. Eventually, the evening rolled around, so they built a fire and made tinfoil dinners and were just sort of shooting the breeze. When they decided to go to bed, the guy who told me this said that he remembered laying in his sleeping bag in his hammock, thinking that even though there was the sound of water in the brook close by, and every now and then there would be insect noises or whatever, the woods were just really quiet that night. Like, being out of civilization made him realize just how rarely we as humans experience real silence, since we all fill our days with so many noises and distractions. He said that it felt eerie, in fact. He could feel himself starting to doze off when the worst thing in the world happened to him. He had to pee when already being comfy and warm. He figured that he would rip the band-aid off and just go and pee before he fell asleep for the night. He put on his headlamp, got out of his hammock and walked about 30 feet away from his buddies in their hammocks to pee. But when he was walking over, he thought that he saw something dart out of sight, unnaturally quick, and heard a sort of crack of a branch. But because they were so far out in the wilderness, near a brook, he didn't think too much of it. He unzipped, did his business, and then, right when he was zipping his pants back up, his headlamp shone on something on the ground that paralyzed him instantly. Because a few feet away from where he was peeing were unmistakably fresh human footprints on the ground. It had rained in the mountains the day before, so the earth was soft in some areas, and there was no doubt in his mind that these were not only human footprints, but whoever made the footprints was definitely barefoot. But the creepiest thing was that the footprints, they weren't staggered. They were side by side, facing where these guys were camping. It was as though someone was just standing still at the edge of their camping spot in total darkness, just watching them. Those were the only footprints my friend could see. No other prints leading to or away from the ones that he saw, but he was totally freaked out, obviously, and so he ran back to his hammock and got his knife that he always takes camping. He loudly whispers his 2 friends' names, but they were already asleep, so they didn't answer. He debated too whether he should wake them up, but in the end he decided against it because, well, there was no real physical threat that he could think of that would justify waking them up. He put his headlamp on a brighter setting and he shone it up in the trees and around the general area of where he had peed, but there was nothing. He didn't sleep that night, obviously, and he just laid in his hammock wide awake with his knife in his hand all night. And upon reflection, those footprints, they looked as though someone had been standing there moments before he walked up to that spot to pee. And he really felt like he and his friends were not alone. When it reached early in the morning, when the sun was just barely starting to rise, my friend decided that he was going to pick up his stuff because he was still spooked and wanted to start hiking back to their car when his friends were up. But when he was taking down his hammock, he saw another set of fresh footprints, but this time they were like only 10 feet away from his hammock, like on the edge of the trees behind his hammock, as if someone had been standing about 10 feet away from his hammock, just staring at him. Again, no other footprints leading to these two footprints, but he was full on freaked out by this point, so this time he woke up his friends and showed them the footprints, and all of them got the heck out of there quickly. And I guess that the moral of this story is that sometimes you're probably not alone as you may think you are. So back in my early 20s, I moved into my first apartment. I quickly got a roommate, and my naive self was so excited to finally be starting in on an adult life that I didn't think about it too much. Now, there were all sorts of sketchy things going on in that apartment building, from the friendly drug dealer across the hall, the frequently reported domestic violence situation going on upstairs, the fistfights in the parking lot, and various other things going on, but the one that I will always remember was the creepy neighbor down the hall. How this particular building was set up too was all the apartments formed a sort of square around and above the parking garage that was on the lower level. In the center of the garage were the dumpsters, so everyone could just throw their trash down from the balcony outside. It should also be noted too that everybody's kitchen windows faced out in the middle, so they were right along the walkway. On more than one occasion too, creepy neighbor would lean out his kitchen window and watch my roommate and I as we were leaving. We had to walk right past him to get to the stairs, and he would ask where we were going, give us creepy compliments, and sometimes come up with excuses to invite us into his apartment, like saying that he ordered too much pizza or he had some furniture that he wanted to sell that we should come and look at. Sometimes he would just stare intensely too and make you want to run past him before he could open his door or drag you through the window or something. Anyway, he also spent a lot of time every day rummaging through the dumpsters. Now, I don't have anything against dumpster diving or anything like that. Sometimes you gotta do what you need to do to survive, right? But doing it in broad daylight, in front of all of your neighbors whose trash is in said dumpster, is just super creepy. Eventually, too, he was evicted, but he just refused to leave. He also left a barely legible, all caps, handwritten note on his door saying that the landlords did not have permission to enter his apartment and hid whenever they came around. In fact, I remember seeing him dash to his door, grabbing one of many notices that they had left before dashing away again to wherever he spent his days. I still don't know how they finally got him, but I'm pretty sure that he continued to search throughout the dumpsters even after that. I got out of there as soon as my lease ended, but I hope that he got the help that he obviously needed. But man, I will never forget just how scary that guy was to live so closely to. I come from a big country family, and we live on a farm. We raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process and whatnot. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead that I grew up on, and still live on, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife, me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids, with lucky me being the only boy. And sometimes my pop's brother comes to stay with us too, especially when hunting season is starting up. So hunting season, deer, is going on, and my pops, his brother, Uncle K, and the cousin that we live with, Uncle V, are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of us kids decide to tag along, me 12 and my sister S 15, and my cousin A 14. We get permission from one of my Uncle K's friends to hunt his land a ways away, basically several hundred acres of forest. An important fact too is that during the time that we were setting up, my pops and uncles were being quiet while the 3 of us kids were talking. My voice hasn't changed, and this is important.
So us kids keep chattering away while the adults are just letting us get our energy out while they check the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working and all that. The strong, silent southern types, you know. And all of a sudden, there's a rustling in the thick brush around us. And suddenly, 3 creepy-looking guys enter the clearing. They stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They're clearly drunk as hell, and they keep looking between A and S and my pops and uncles, like they're debating something. My pops and uncles stand up. Last bit of backstory too. Every dude in my family is huge. I'm 19 now, and I'm 6'5". My dad is the biggest of 6'10", 280. Just deeply intimidating, and so are my uncles V and K. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of the rifles and points it at them. These dudes start running out of the clearing like the devil was after them, and my pops immediately says that we're clearing out. My uncles don't even question it, and neither do us kids. We're freaking out and totally take things down sloppy, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up his camping equipment. We get back into cell service, and my dad calls the cops about seeing those guys, but the cops just don't seem to think that it's serious since nothing happened. We also told the owner of the land, who took it more seriously as he had kids of his own, but we never heard anything about them appearing again on his land to his knowledge. It's at that moment, though, that I realized A, S, and me, with my unchanged voice, were the only ones these guys could hear talking, and they obviously thought that they'd come across a camp of 3 girls by themselves. About 4 years ago, I was a line cook at a restaurant that was located in a hotel. I worked at this restaurant for nearly 2 years with no problem walking the half-mile or so distance that it took me to reach the bus that I took to get home from my job. But this restaurant had a partnership with the hotel for late-night room service. So, pretty much every night after closing the restaurant, 1, sometimes 2, line cooks would stay after until 3 a.m., preparing simple things like salads, sandwiches, and wraps that would then be taken to the rooms via hotel employees. Now, me being a recent college grad in my early 20s would always volunteer myself for the extra hours. The student loans and rent cost a lot of dollars. And as I said prior, I had worked this job for a decent amount of time with no problems. Except for one rainy night that I'll never forget. As I left my work that morning around 3 a.m., I realized that I'd messed up when I forgot an umbrella that day. I now had to make my normal walk under decent rainfall. After lighting a cigarette and putting in my headphones, I was ready to make my unfortunate journey, though. I started on my normal routine walking back, cutting through the alleyways that I'd memorized as my shortcuts through the city. And about halfway through my walk, a car started following next to me with the passenger window down. Aware of my surroundings, I had recognized this, but decided to mind my business and keep my head down and just keep walking. Growing up in a rough neighborhood taught me better than to put my nose where it doesn't belong. Unfortunately, though, that wasn't enough. Over the music coming from my headphones, I could hear shouting coming from the car. I turned to face the car driver, but didn't stop walking. He looked back at me, and it was a white man in his late 30s, early 40s, with a bandana and sunglasses on. I remember thinking that it was odd that he was driving with sunglasses so late in the night, but he said, "Hey man, where are you heading?" And I could hear him say that. At this point, I took one of the earbuds out and replied, "What's it to you?" To which he answered, "I figured I'd ask. You look like you need a ride to get out of the rain." I told the guy that I'm all set and that I was almost at my destination anyway. Now keep in mind, I'm still walking and he's driving slowly next to me on this side of the street at 3 a.m. He replied with, "No problem. Do you smoke weed, man?" At this point, I was annoyed with this guy. I had just gotten done working 13 hours in a kitchen, and all I wanted to do was listen to some damn music and unwind before bed. I told the guy, "No man, I don't," even though I actually do, but I replied in a stern and obviously annoyed tone this time. He just looked at me, almost like he knew that I was bullcrapping him. I said, "Have a good night," before replacing my earphone back into my ear and taking a ride up a one-way side street, losing him in the process. I arrived at my bus stop safely, and with about 10 minutes to spare. I was the only one there besides one other man and a homeless man sleeping on a bench some ways up, and after about 3 minutes, the car pulls up to the side of the curb, directly in the bus lane. This time, I'm actually facing him. He rolled down the window and said, "You're heading to the south side, huh?" I replied, "How do you know?" And he pointed above me. I looked up, and on the digital board it says the next bus destination and time. He said to me, "Do you want to lift there? I'm heading that way." And at this point, I was all set and the hood came out of me. I told him, "Hey man, I don't know you and I don't want to ride with you, so move." He just stared at me again, but this time I stared back. We locked eyes for a good 20 seconds before the bus approached behind him, honking loudly. The guy checked his rearview mirror, rolled up the window, and just sped off. On the way home, I remember looking behind me and my surroundings to make sure this creep didn't try to follow me home. Luckily, he didn't, and when I got off the bus, I was in my apartment safe within about 5 minutes. But fast forward a few weeks, and one of my buddies who I work with asked me if I heard about the body the cops found in a dumpster behind the grocery store, less than 5 minutes from the hotel. I told him no, but he said that the body of a girl was found strangled to death, and the cops are on the lookout for the killer, that's still at large. The cops had no evidence, and were asking for people to come forward with additional information. I hadn't told my buddy, or anyone besides my girlfriend at that time, what had happened that night. And when I told him the story, he insisted that I call the cops and tell them what happened. I told him that I would, but in truth, I never actually did. Call me old school, but like I said earlier, I learned growing up to just mind my own business and avoid trouble, and trouble won't find me. So that's what I did. To this day, I still haven't heard anything more on the case. I wonder if it was the same guy, and I think about how weird it was for him to approach me the way that he did, at such an odd hour of the day. The sunglasses, the following me to the bus stop. That stuff doesn't normally happen, right? Anyway, after that experience, I started walking home with my knife in my pocket, and walked with only one earphone in the whole time so that I could hear my surroundings better. I also stopped volunteering for the overnight shift as well. I do hope that whoever killed that girl gets caught, or at least has a change of heart. It's crazy just how fragile life is. Hey. This happened when I was about 10, I think, or at least around that age. I'm 15 now. So, I'd been at my cousin's wedding, which was across the country, and we had to stay in a hotel at the time. We'd been up since 8 a.m. and spent the whole day celebrating, so everyone was very tired. My dad had been drinking and wasn't able to drive us back to the hotel, so my mum, my sister, and I made plans to get a lift from my auntie and my uncle. My dad and my brother went with my other auntie and uncle. Anyway, we had left the venue and had been driving for about 10 minutes down a dark, deserted one-way road. Everything was fine. I was sitting in the back seat with my mum and my sister, and we're all just chatting, although I was kind of half asleep. And that was until my uncle cursed under his breath and the car slowed down. This woke me up fully because I knew that the road was very long and there were only trees on this side of it. Also, I was young and I believed that cursing was a terrible sin at the time. But when the car completely stopped, I sat up a bit, trying to see what was going on. Then, to my horror, I saw a man walking towards the car. This wouldn't have been as scary as it was if it weren't pitch black, in the middle of nowhere, and if the man didn't have a load of glass shards in his face. It was truly just a horrifying sight. There were pieces of glass in his skin, and it was just so bloody, and there was even a big shard sticking out of his cheek. He knocked on the window and motioned for my auntie to roll down her window. She rolled it down a bit, and my uncle asked, "What do you want?" The man with this glass in his face asked, "Could you give me and a friend a ride to the hospital?" Friend, I thought to myself. I couldn't see another man. That's when a second man walked out from the bushes, and he also had glass in his face, and it was also really bloody. The second man walked over to the driver's side of the car where my uncle was. He asked my uncle to roll down his window as well. My uncle complied, but like my auntie, he only rolled it down a small bit. and the guy asked, "Can you please give us a ride?" My auntie told him, "I'm sorry, but there isn't any room." The first man looked at the back seat as if he didn't believe my auntie. He made eye contact, and it was probably the scariest 5 seconds that I've ever experienced. Just then, he pulled on the handle of the car door and it opened. This is when I started to panic, and I could feel my mum tense up. My auntie struggled with the man to try and close the door. Luckily, though, the man seemed like he'd been drinking, so he wasn't as strong as he would have been if he was sober. The second man didn't seem to be doing much, he just kind of seemed to be watching the whole thing play out. Finally, my auntie was able to close the door and locked it. She said, "Please just take this, I'm sorry," and she scrambled out a $20 note. I can't remember if the man actually took it or not, but the last thing that I do remember about that night was my uncle driving away as fast as he could. After that, I think that I fell asleep or I was in shock from what had just happened. But I wonder now, what would have happened if there was room in the car? Would the men have tried to hurt us, or were they actually in a terrible accident and genuinely needed a ride? I don't know, but I'm just thankful that we got away that night, with everyone pretty much unscathed. I'm an 18-year-old female with 2 female roommates of the same age. We just moved to a very big city, and we live in a small apartment complex with a classic dark, scary back alley, which just so happens to be where my roommate's parking spot is located as well. So, I work overnight, and one night I got off work at around 12:30, midnight. My roommate picked me up, and we headed home. We were being pretty loud, talking and laughing as we made our way around the building and up to the stairs to our apartment. And the second that we got in and sat down on the couch, our doorbell rang. We were, of course, very confused, and from our position on the couch, we can see out the window to our outer door. The way that our apartment is arranged, you unlock a door to get into a hallway that has doors leading to our apartment, and our neighbours as well, but it looks like the outer door leads directly into our apartment from the outside. And there's a large, middle-aged man outside our door. He sees us sitting on the couch and starts talking to us, asking us to open the door, that he needs help. He tells us that someone is trying to rob him, and he needs us to open the door and call the police for him. We immediately jump up and step out of view of the window, obviously not near stupid enough to open the door. We hear our neighbour's door open though. 2 males live next door to us, and they're very nice. We peek out into the hallway and tell him what's going on. He opens the door, talks to the man, tells him to wait outside while he gets his phone. We can hear their exchange through the window. Our late-night visitor tells our neighbour that he has a bunch of silver ingots or something on him and that they're worth a lot of money. Some guy was trying to rob him right outside and he needs someone to call the cops. The neighbour complies, but while he's ringing the police, the guy just takes off running, never to be seen again. The cops never showed up either. And I know that isn't a big deal, but that asking for help thing is a classic serial killer ploy apparently. Plus, he was supposedly getting robbed right outside where we just were, and we didn't hear or see a thing. It has bad intentions written all over it, but either way, we were left pretty creeped out that night. So I had a creepy experience that I never really thought too much about, but I figured that I'd share it. So one morning, probably around 4 a.m. I think, I woke up to a very strange kind of growling of voice. I guess I moved and looked over my shoulder. My boyfriend noticed that I was awake and said, "You heard that too, right?" Confused, I said yes, it woke me up. He said that he woke up to this feeling of an evil presence to the left side of the room in the corner. He said that he was laying there and began praying silently, and it was while he prayed that this thing began growling and speaking something that he couldn't understand. After I woke up, it apparently stopped. It wasn't one of our pets, I can assure you of that. The windows were closed. It wasn't from outside or another room, because it sounded as clear as someone talking to you only 10 feet away. I've had a couple of other strange things happen in this apartment too. Once when I was washing dishes, a screw flew across the room and hit me in the center of my back. Above me was ceiling, and there were no lights or anything, and from where it hit me, it had definitely been thrown. It's all kind of interesting, and we're currently looking at a house built in 1883 to move into from this apartment, so secretly I kind of hope this next place is haunted as well. Call me crazy, but I enjoy the thrill.